Urgent, a new era of Ukraine's defense. The Kremlin is losing not only on the front lines but also in the sky. An era of air defense that has Moscow shaking. Zelensky has announced lightning-fast agreements with allies, and this already looks like a turning point in the battle for Ukraine's skies. Strengthening air defense and ultra-powerful protection of the sky. Russia's aerial collapse is near, and this is only the beginning. The interceptor drone Zirka is ruining all of the Kremlin's plans. Fast, cheap, and autonomous. This weapon is already on its way. And most notably, Ukraine will receive Gripen E, modern fighter jets that will take the Air Force to a new level. Meanwhile, the Russian system of air superiority is falling apart at the seams. I'll tell you all the details about Ukraine's mega weapons in just a moment. Greetings, publisher of Ukraine. Today with you is Solomia Dolik and the latest events. A new era of Ukraine's defense. Zelensky has announced a significant strengthening of air defense and fateful agreements with partners. Decisions are already on the table that change everything. According to the head of state, deputy head of the presidential office, Pavlo Palisa, reported on the progress of negotiations with allies regarding the implementation of specific agreements in the field of air defense.
There are things we can do additionally within the framework of cooperation between the United States and European countries. It is important that Ukrainian diplomats ensure 100% of the necessary communication between the military of the respective countries.
Although specific details are not being disclosed yet, the statement itself indicates active work on new defense solutions. This concerns not only the supply of additional air defense systems, but also the deepening of cooperation between Ukraine, the United States, and European partners. Against the backdrop of daily Russian air attacks, strengthening air defense remains one of the main priorities for the Ukrainian authorities. That is why any new agreements with allies can become an important step toward even more reliable protection of Ukrainian cities, critical infrastructure, and the civilian population. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to impress with its technologies. The interceptor drone Zirka is already in the sky to destroy Shaheds. Ukraine is not waiting but is rapidly developing its own air defense technologies. According to the published specifications, the drone can reach speeds of up to 340 km per hour, is capable of operating at altitudes of up to 6 km, and can stay in the air for up to 20 minutes. Particular attention is drawn to its cost of up to $2,000, which makes the system relatively affordable for widespread use in countering enemy Shaheds. The main feature of the Zirka is its claimed ability to automatically detect and destroy aerial targets, which potentially allows for a significant reduction in response time and an increase in the effectiveness of intercepting enemy drones. At the same time, Britain is delivering a powerful blow to the Kremlin's plans. London has announced a new multi-million aid package for Ukraine, £290 million. This is approximately 336 million euros. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the agreements reached after a meeting in Kyiv with Jonathan Powell, the UK Prime Minister's national security advisor. In total, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, London has already provided Ukraine with almost £22 billion in aid, which amounts to about 25 billion euros. During the negotiations, the parties discussed not only the new support package, but also the situation at the front, Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory that are causing fuel shortages and affecting the mood within Russian society. Special attention was given to preparations for the upcoming NATO summit, as well as further diplomatic steps to achieve a just peace. The president of Ukraine emphasized that international partners highly appreciate the results of the actions taken by the Ukrainian defense forces.
It is important that our partners note Ukraine's successes at the front, as well as the results of our middle strikes and deep strikes.
The new package of British aid once again demonstrates that London's support for Ukraine remains systematic and cooperation between the countries continues to evolve both militarily and diplomatically. But this is only the beginning, and it will get even stronger moving forward. A historic agreement. Kyiv is purchasing 16 Swedish multi-role Gripen E fighter jets, which are expected to significantly strengthen the air force and the protection of Ukrainian skies. According to the plan, Ukraine will begin receiving the fighter jets at the beginning of 2029, which opens up a long-term prospect for modernizing aviation and transitioning to modern Western platforms. In addition to the delivery of the aircraft themselves, the agreement provides for full support, technical maintenance, equipment supply, as well as the training of Ukrainian pilots and technical personnel, who are already undergoing the necessary training. This comprehensive financial agreement is being fully funded and financed through a European loan, with the steadfast and ongoing support of the United Kingdom, which remains one of Ukraine's most vital and influential strategic partners.
What the Kremlin considered a distant scenario just yesterday is rapidly taking real shape today. The West is launching new production programs for powerful long-range weapons for Ukraine, and this could radically change the balance of power and turn the tide of the war. It is becoming increasingly difficult for Moscow to hide its tension. Every new signal from the West sounds like a warning about escalation that can no longer be ignored. The time when the rules were determined solely by the Kremlin appears to be coming to an end. And now the main question is, how far will this new phase of confrontation go? All the details are in our report. What the Kremlin has feared in recent years may become a reality. The West is not only refusing to reduce its military support for Ukraine, but is also beginning to launch the production of a new generation of long-range missiles. And if the plans of defense companies are implemented, the number could reach hundreds or even thousands of high-precision weapons for the Ukrainian army. The first alarming signal from Moscow came from the Netherlands. There, it was announced that the production of 700 long-range cruise missiles by Destiny would be funded specifically for Ukraine. And this is just one program. At the same time, reports continue to circulate about Ukraine's use of new long-range ARAM missiles with a stated range of over 930 kilometers. But that's not even the most interesting part. According to some estimates, we may be talking about future deliveries not in single batches, but on a scale that will be counted in the thousands. For the Russian military command, such a prospect looks almost like a strategic nightmare. After all, if previously it was possible to try to hide warehouses, headquarters, and military factories somewhere deep in the rear, now the very concept of a safe depth is beginning to collapse. From Belgorod to the Urals, from military airfields to defense industry enterprises, all of this is gradually falling into the zone of potential risk. But the real intrigue is unfolding in the United Kingdom. The defense giant MBDA has announced successful tests of the new crossbow drone missile. And here, what is especially painful for the Kremlin is not even the range of 800 kilometers or the 300-kilogram warhead. The speed of development is impressive. Only 9 months passed from the inception of the idea to the finished prototype. In fact, the British have demonstrated that modern precision weapons can now be created faster than Russian officials can write yet another report about having no analogs. And the crossbow is just one part of a much bigger story. Within the framework of the British Breakstock project, several other long-range systems are being developed in parallel. For example, the Tiger Shark is capable of striking targets at distances of up to 1,000 kilometers, carrying a warhead weighing 300 kilograms. And its cost is just over $500,000, which by modern military standards is almost a budget option. Even more interesting is the Sky Lens, with a claimed range of up to 1,200 kilometers. One detail adds a special twist to the situation. All these systems are created according to the ITAR-free principle. In simple terms, without American components that could restrict the transfer of weapons to third countries. In other words, the British deliberately designed these missiles so that in the future they could be quickly transferred to Ukraine without unnecessary bureaucracy. For the Kremlin, this is a very unpleasant signal. There are fewer and fewer political levers to block such deliveries. The most symbolic thing is how the West's approach itself has changed. If at the beginning of the full-scale war, the Allies argued even about transferring individual artillery systems, now there is increasing talk of joint production, multi-year financing programs, and the creation of entire lines of long-range weaponry specifically tailored to Ukraine's needs. In fact, a new defense ecosystem is taking shape, in which Ukraine is no longer just a recipient of aid, but one of the key centers of future European security. It's ironic that Putin started this war under the slogans of demilitarizing Ukraine. A few years have passed, and now Ukraine is gaining access to technologies it could only dream of before. The West is launching new production lines, funding hundreds and thousands of long-range systems. If even a part of these programs is implemented, the coming years could turn out to be much less peaceful for many Russian targets than the Kremlin is used to expecting. For Russians, nighttime alarms are becoming as routine a part of life as morning coffee. No sooner had Moscow recovered from the previous attacks than the skies over Russia and the occupied territories were once again filled with the sounds of explosions and sirens. Everything looked most symbolic precisely in the Russian capital. While officials were reporting yet another round of successful interceptions, drones kept flying over the Moscow region one after another. Throughout the night, Mayor Sergei Sobyanin was practically counting new targets approaching the city in real time. According to him, nearly 60 drones were allegedly shot down on the approaches to Moscow. The irony is that the more such reports appear, the harder it is for Russians to believe the fairy tales about the absolute safety of the capital. Powerful explosions were also heard in Bryansk. Holy shit! That's something. According to local sources, the railway infrastructure was hit, one of the key arteries through which Russian military logistics are supplied. This is a particularly painful issue for the Kremlin because while the generals dream of new offensives, more and more facilities in the rear are forced to think not about transporting cargo, but about their own survival. It was no less intense in occupied Crimea. There, explosions were heard in several districts of the peninsula at once. Particular attention was drawn to the Tavria thermal power plant near Simferopol, one of the key energy facilities that Russia once built as a symbol of the final integration of occupied Crimea into its own system. Now, however, this symbol is increasingly appearing in the news due to damage, fires, and the consequences of attacks. After previous strikes, burnt-out structures, holes, and serious destruction had already been recorded there. Events in Armyansk developed even more interestingly. According to preliminary information, the strike hit the FSB border service building near the railway station. After the explosion, a fire broke out and eyewitnesses reported further detonations. When security force facilities start exploding, even the most ardent supporters of Kremlin TV shows suddenly begin to ask very uncomfortable questions about the effectiveness of the entire defense system. Reports of explosions also came from Donetsk and Berdyansk. In the latter, particular attention was drawn to the area around the railway station where a fire broke out after the attack. And this once again demonstrates a simple trend. The geography of the strikes is constantly expanding, and the list of sites that the Russian authorities considered relatively safe is rapidly shrinking. The final statistics from the Russian Ministry of Defense look especially telling. They claim that supposedly 301 Ukrainian drones were shot down in a single night. And here a rather awkward paradox arises. If the threat is truly so massive that they have to report hundreds of targets over dozens of regions, then Russia itself is essentially admitting that the air war has long since gone far beyond the front lines. And while Kremlin officials continue to talk about having the situation under control, Russian regions are waking up more and more often not to alarm clocks but to explosions. And it seems that for many residents of Russia, this is becoming a new, very unpleasant reality.
The latest decisions by partners have been a real cold shower for Moscow. Instead of fatigue, there are new billions of dollars in aid. Instead of division, even closer coordination. And instead of Ukraine's isolation, ever deeper integration with the Western world. It seems that while the Kremlin was dreaming of turning back time, time itself has started to play against them. What exactly shocked Moscow after the latest Ramstein meeting, and why is Europe increasingly talking about Ukraine as one of the key factors in the continent's security? We'll tell you more next.
The Kremlin expected the West to grow tired of Ukraine, but the exact opposite happened. Ramstein shocked everyone. While Russian propaganda has been spinning tales for years about NATO's collapse, Europe's fatigue, and the inevitable end of support, Ukraine's allies have just put another $4 billion of military aid on the table. And the most unpleasant thing for Moscow is that the money is going exactly to those areas that have recently caused the Russian army the most problems. The biggest blow to the Kremlin's dreams is connected to the skies. Almost $1 billion will be allocated to the Pearl program, which supplies Ukraine with missiles for the Patriot systems. The largest contributions are being made by Germany, Norway, the Netherlands, and Sweden. But that's not all. Separately, Berlin is allocating an additional $200 million through the Jumpstart mechanism for long-term purchases of Patriot missiles. In other words, our partners are already thinking not only about today's attacks, but also about protecting Ukrainian skies in the years to come. For the Kremlin, this means a very unpleasant prospect of having to spend more and more missiles on strikes that are increasingly ending in failure. The package for long-range artillery is no less significant. About $540 million will go toward purchasing extended-range munitions. Here, Norway, Denmark, Spain, Lithuania, and Luxembourg play a key role. And this is already a direct blow to Russian logistics, depots, and command posts, which are feeling increasingly vulnerable even far from the front line. But the real star of the new Ramstein meeting once again turned out to be Ukrainian drones. Partners are allocating over $1 billion for unmanned systems. The United Kingdom will fund the purchase of as many as 150,000 Ukrainian drones. The Netherlands is investing in cruise missile drones for the defense forces. Norway is supporting the purchase of maritime drones, which have already turned the Black Sea into a constant zone of anxiety for the Russian fleet. In fact, the world is increasingly investing specifically in the kind of weaponry that has now become the main symbol of Ukraine's technological superiority. And this is probably the most important signal. If at the beginning of the war, Ukraine was asking its partners for help, today those partners are increasingly investing in Ukrainian innovations. Moreover, Ukraine and Germany have already agreed on the development of an anti-ballistic program and the joint production of modern interceptor missiles. In other words, this is no longer just about supplying weapons, but about shaping a joint defense industry of the future. It turns out to be quite an ironic picture. Putin started this war to weaken Ukraine and distance it from the West. Instead, Ukraine is receiving new billions, new production facilities, new technologies, and ever deeper integration with the world's most powerful countries. And the longer the Kremlin tries to exhaust Ukraine, the more resources, money, and opportunities ultimately work in its favor. It seems that the time Moscow was counting on is increasingly playing for a completely different team. And it seems that in Brussels, they have finally understood the main point. Ukraine has not only endured, it has become one of the most powerful military forces in Europe. After a record-length meeting with Ukraine's participation, President Volodymyr Zelensky voiced a conclusion that just a few years ago would have seemed like fantasy to many. According to him, today partners no longer argue about whether Ukraine is capable of winning. They proceed from the understanding that Ukraine is a key element of security for the entire continent.
This is the longest meeting with Ukraine's participation in our history, and it is truly very important. The main conclusion of all partners: Ukraine is strong. Everyone absolutely acknowledges this.
It is especially telling that almost all the decisions of the latest Ramstein meeting align with Ukraine's priorities: air defense, Patriot missiles, long-range weaponry, drones, army funding, and the development of our own defense industry. It seems that the West is no longer just helping Ukraine, but is gradually restructuring its defense policy around the experience of the Ukrainian war. And this is already a completely different level of partnership. Such signals are no less painful for the Kremlin. While Russian propaganda has spent years trying to convince the world that Ukraine is on the verge of exhaustion, Europe is talking about new missile production programs, joint defense projects, and long-term funding for Ukrainian defense. Moreover, Zelensky directly emphasized that the partners are increasingly understanding the Kremlin's true intentions.
Putin wants everything here to burn, and he is insane. The partners can sense this. Ukraine is ready to negotiate with him despite this.
Separately, the president drew attention to another issue, one that Moscow would prefer not to mention. According to him, Putin is afraid not only of defeat, but also of the consequences that the end of the war would have for himself. After all, hundreds of thousands of people who have been to the front will sooner or later return home. And for the Kremlin system, this could pose no less of a threat than any sanctions or military setbacks.
Undoubtedly, Putin is afraid of his army returning home, which is why he so fears the end of the war without a victory. There will be no victory.
But perhaps the most striking statement was another one made by Zelensky, and it explains a lot about the current reaction of Western partners.
Today, Ukraine is de facto the second army of NATO, which is not inferior to the world's second army.
Just a few years ago, the Kremlin dreamed of preventing Ukraine from getting closer to the West. Today, however, Ukraine is receiving billions of dollars in aid, moving toward EU membership, and becoming increasingly integrated into the European security system. It turns out to be quite ironic. The longer Putin tries to pull Ukraine back into the orbit of the old empire, the faster it becomes an integral part of a new European future. And it seems that this is now one of the Kremlin's greatest strategic failures.
And how do you feel about these developments? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button under the video, and stay up to date with the main news. There's more to come, and we'll see you in the next segment.